Jeremy Marshall. I am the Family Discipleship Minister at Brooks Avenue Church of Christ in Raleigh, North Carolina. I want to begin a new series of videos called Discovering Discipleship. And the very first thing that we need to do is define discipleship, define it biblically. And so what I want to do in my first few videos is to just simply go to the text and see what the parameters are for discipleship. See what we learn about living the Christian life. See what we learn about spiritual formation. Because ultimately, discipleship goes by those terms, spiritual formation, Christian living. But really, it's how we live in light of the gospel. Now, I want to begin with Matthew 28:18 through 20. That's called typically with the Great Commission. And it's a disciple-making passage. Let's hear what Jesus has to say about discipleship and talk about a few things that we can glean just right from this. So many people call this the church's marching orders. Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." The very first thing I want to notice about discipleship is that we are to go and make disciples because all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to Christ. We are doing discipleship. We are teaching people the gospel. We're baptizing them under the authority of Christ, who himself has all authority in heaven and on earth. We are spreading his kingdom where sins are forgiven and death works backwards and everything sad is coming untrue. So we do this under the authority of Christ, and we realize he is working all things together for the good of those who love him. He has an eternal perspective. He has infinite power and might. And I want to tie that to the very last thing he says. This is the second thing. We don't do this in our own power, just as we don't do this by our own authority, but by Christ. We don't do it in our own power. He says, "I am with you always until the end of the age." Christ continues as God with us. He is dwelling in each one of us and among us as the gathered church by his Holy Spirit. The next thing is that we're going to all the nations and make disciples. What this indicates to you is that we build a church culture, a gospel culture, a culture around Christ that is able to at once embrace, right, all nationalities and cultures, but also transcend the cultures of the nations. Ultimately, Revelation gives us this vision of every nation, tribe, tongue, people under heaven, this beautiful kaleidoscope of humanity, redeemed and worshiping Christ. And so we are always wanting to create, like I said, a church culture that is able to embrace the various cultures, but also transcend them. We baptize our disciples into the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You are actually being immersed, brought into the life of the triune God. You're chosen and beloved by the Father. Christ has done the work necessary to satisfy God's justice and impute his righteousness to you. Okay, so he's done the work necessary to save you, and the Holy Spirit applies that work, and like I said, dwells in us and among us. The Holy Spirit is our guarantee and our seal for salvation. One other thing that's really crucial here is that the local church is the context for discipleship. Jesus doesn't have free-range sheep. The local church is the context in which we teach, we baptize, we proclaim the word, we administer the ordinances of baptism and the Lord's Supper that continue to tell the story of the gospel. So ultimately, what we can glean here from discipleship, first of all, it's done under the authority of Christ, to make disciples, and disciples live under Christ's authority. Secondly, it's not done in our own power, but by Christ, who is with us and among us by his Holy Spirit. Third, we are trying to create a culture, build a culture that is able to embrace different kinds of people, but also transcend the culture that we live in. And fourth, we're being drawn into God's life. We're being drawn into God's life. That's quite an adventure. And finally, we are disciples in the context of a local church. You do discipleship with other people. So that's what we learned from Matthew 28:18 through 20. Next time, I want to go to Romans 12:1 and 2 and talk about what it means to be specifically disciples in light of the gospel. You guys have a blessed week.